and turn to segment 5. And I will try to keep this really relatively short. So here, the argument is relatively simple, but it is a little bit dangerous. It's dangerous territory. Because what I want to argue is that we are, or we have been in our past, very obsessed with teaching content. And the students have to learn content. The students have to learn, let me call that, this is not the right term, facts. Yeah? Things that are usually not discussable, things that are nicely testable, with multiple choice in particular, at the end or in the middle of the semester, because then I don't have to read students' essays, I just can look at answer right or wrong, and my student assistants can grade the exams. I don't have to do this. Yeah, this is all nice for the teacher who wants to go home and have a happy life at home. But this obsession with content is at the cost of how we teach. Now, what I would like to argue is that we have to focus much stronger on how we teach than on what we teach. Now, this sounds a little bit dangerous or revolutionary in the sense of, are we going to do away with content? Does it not matter anymore what we teach? No, that's not what I'm saying. And I'm also not saying that we have to focus on the pedagogy, yeah, on the tricks that we use in order to make our students not yawn and fall off their chairs or want to go home and not be bored. Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. But the renovation, the re-innovation of higher education, of learning, has to focus much more on what we are doing in the classroom in terms of our teaching, and not so much on the learning that actually takes place in terms of content. So the focus, the shift of focus from the what to the how we learn and how we teach, and the role of the institution in facilitating learning and teaching implies that the whole learning process is becoming more transparent. And we don't focus typically on the learning process itself. What we focus on is the product of the learning, okay? The outcome. At the end of the learning, that's where we want to see some change. And this is not bad, this is not wrong, but an obsession with that makes us forget that a lot of interesting stuff, in particular those that relate back to segment 2 and segment 3, take place in the process of learning. So let me focus on that a little bit to illuminate that, and then with segment 6 in 2 weeks, that's where I want to focus on that in a lot more detail. But typically, what we want to do in classrooms in order to make a change is bring in projects, bring in work that students can collaborate on that connect to the real world. Yeah. So we want to bring in parts of the real world where the students can practice their own judgment, their own questions, their own solutions or probable solutions. So bringing in problems into the classroom, yeah, and it doesn't matter in what discipline, it doesn't matter in what thematic content, is an important way of getting the students engaged so that they learn to ask questions and learn ways of answering these questions, and hopefully in a collaborative way. I will get to that in a second. So what we are doing when we focus on the how we learn, we are much more focusing on connection making. This is why I suggest don't use, when you teach, textbooks. Yeah? I don't know what the textbooks these days in China look like, but the American textbooks and the European textbooks following the American textbooks, first of all, they are very expensive, extremely expensive. They also come typically with a little disc with visual aids for the teacher, so the teacher already doesn't have to make up their own aids anymore. But then they have a text for the students to read, a chapter, and this chapter is relatively disconnected from the next chapter. And that chapter is disconnected from the next chapter. So there are these different chapters that cover the whole discipline or an aspect of the discipline. Sometimes there are also different theories. But how they are connected and how the theories are contradicting each other sometimes, that would be the interesting part for students to discuss. For the teacher also to say, well, my opinion is, I'm more on that side, but, so these are objectables. These are issues that can be problematized. In the textbook, then you have these chapter texts, and then you have a little sidebar. That is a box where the chapter is summarized, where the essentials are. And that is typically the kind of stuff that comes up in the midterm and in the finals. So students, very quickly, in college they are also already socialized. In high school, they know, they don't have to read the text. But they can read the little text box, right? And preparing for the midterm, and preparing for the exams, they just have to work through the different chapters through these little boxes. And that's why in the nights in particular, before midterm exams, and before final exams, this is when there are no parties. This is when the library is full with students, and they all are learning through those text boxes. Yeah, they are working through these boxes and trying to find out what is it that is coming that they need to spit back for the exams. Right? But this is unproductive, ultimately, because the connections between the chapters are missing. And textbooks, they deliver, good textbooks, the connections in the introductory chapter. That's where they give an overview over the different theories, and partly even suggest that some of these theories don't go together. Yeah, they are not in sync. But those are the interesting parts for students to become aware of. Yeah? So this is why I do never work with, in particular, expensive textbooks. But I'm bringing in readings from different authors, and some of these readings are contradicting each other. And this is where sometimes students say, but Professor Bamberg, what do you want me to believe? This is not the good question. I don't want you to believe anything. I want you to make up your mind of where, from your point of view, that you bring in, those contradictions can be, if at all, resolved. Yeah, I want you to see the pluses and the minuses of these different approaches, of these different theories. Okay? So this learning process is not a linear process, but it is one that is a lot more circular, but also that, on the one hand, it allows students to ask questions, but on the other hand, it pushes them into contradictions that are partly not resolvable. Yeah? So it is making them realize that there are uncertainties, yeah, and that there is a complexity out there outside of textbooks, typically, that students have to be confronted with early on. And again, you already see that I'm not touching on content here. This can be done in classes of morphology, syntax, language acquisition, first or second, yeah, they are full of contradictions. And that is the spice. That is the interesting stuff. I think that potentially can motivate students. For some students, they also say, oh no, this is too much. Yeah, I'm already stressed enough. So now I'm supposed to make up my own mind. This is too much for me. So let me just give you a short clip from a TED talk of Sir Ken Robinson on divergent thinking. Yeah, this shows up here in managing complexity and managing uncertainty. So let's see whether we can find this here. I have to move forward to 7. I couldn't cut this today. Okay, I think this is a good starting point, somewhere here. Yeah, so remember Sir Ken Robinson, he suggests a very different approach to schooling. He wants to go in the opposite direction.
About changing the paradigm. There was a great study done recently of divergent thinking. Published a couple of years ago. Divergent thinking isn't the same thing as creativity. I define creativity as the process of having original ideas that have value. Divergent thinking isn't a synonym, but it's an essential capacity for creativity. It's the ability to see lots of possible answers to a question, lots of possible ways of interpreting a question, to think what Edward de Bono would probably call laterally, to think not just in linear or convergent ways, to see multiple answers, not one. So, I mean, there are tests for this. I mean, one kind of cod example would be people might be asked to say, how many uses can you think of for a paperclip? One of those routine questions. Most people might come up with 10 or 15. People who are good at this might come up with 200. And they do that by saying, well, could the paperclip be 200 foot tall and be made out of foam rubber? You know, like, does it have to be a paperclip as we know it, Jim? You know. Now, there are tests for this, and they gave them to 1,500 people. This is in a book called Breakpoint and Beyond. And on the protocol of the test, if you scored above a certain level, you'd be considered to be a genius at divergent thinking. Okay? So my question to you is, what percentage of the people tested, of the 1,500, scored at genius level for divergent thinking? Now, you need to know one more thing about them. These were kindergarten children. So what do you think? What percentage at genius level? 80. 80, okay. 98%. Now, the thing about this was it was a longitudinal study. So they retested the same children 5 years later, ages of 8 to 10. What do you think? 50? They retested them again 5 years later, ages 13 to 15.
Okay, we can stop here. But you see, I mean, his argument here is, and I think it is well taken, is that young children are creative, very creative, highly creative. They play around with language, they play around with everything, sometimes in a way that annoys the parents. But this type of skill, it goes down. Yeah, it could go up. Well, from 95, there's not much to go up. But his argument is schooling brings it down. Yeah, education, literacy, math, yeah, which are all important. So we don't want to do away with any of them, right? But there's something in the schooling process that brings these types of creative ways of making sense, of convergent, of divergent thinking down. And it transforms it into convergent thinking, thinking with the same categories that we are used to. So that's what he's arguing. It needs to be replaced by a different paradigm, by a different way of schooling, right? So that was what I alluded to in segment 2 and partly also in segment 3. And here we are back, but now we are closer to some way of moving changes into the process of learning. Okay, let me sum this up. That in a way of bringing collaboration, bringing creativity, bringing processes in the classroom, yeah, also in outside of the classroom curricular, co-curricular activities into this, that we have shifted the focus from teaching, from putting everything in the teacher's role, in the teacher's lab, so to speak, to the student, to the learning. But what we need to do is we need to create spaces in the institution within which a creative or collaborative, a way of frame breaking can take place that is cultivated. As one of your colleagues said, where the talents that students bring to the institution are being fostered. Yeah. Robinson is arguing for a more personalized style. That could be a way, but how are teachers trained to uncover or realize the personal talent of students in the current curriculum? Yeah? So this would be one question to struggle with or to work with. But then also to bring spaces into the classroom where projects, small projects, can be worked on. Projects, hopefully, and I pick up on your other suggestion, where there are others who have been potentially more experienced with a particular project or project type or learning type, who can bring in questions from a different perspective. Yeah, this is typically what we do with learning assistants, peer learning assistants that I use, and I will present that idea in more detail in segment 6, where we bring in small groups of students that circle around a particular problem, yeah, learning to ask different questions and then realizing that some questions are not that dumb, that they are quite good because they build on more collaborative and also more creative potential than before. Now, this is the type of space that the institutions have to be working on by possibly bringing teachers from different disciplines together and discuss these spaces, train each other, yeah, because we can. We don't have to have the same subject, morphology or language or humanistic arts, whatever it is that our specialty is. We can work with teachers and potentially learn from teachers of different disciplines a lot better than from teachers who are trained in the same tradition as we were. Yeah, so creating a space within which these kinds of things can be practiced. So in the next segment I will go more into this, but this concludes the segment number 5.